wanted to just say a few words about the Core to College project itself and give you a little bit more context for what this all means in the context of the various initiatives that are happening in Oregon and how it is that we're bringing all of these voices here together today. And so the Core to College grant is funded by Lumina Foundation, Hewlett Foundation, Carnegie Corporation of New York, and they're working through Rockefeller Philanthropies to fund 10 states. Actually, we've just added an 11th state, Tennessee, to the Core to College network. And all of the states who are involved in this project, who are selected for these grants, have demonstrated that we're really serious about focusing on a broader education continuum. And in Oregon, that's what we talk about when we talk about P20, that broader system, and how we can better align the segments of that system to function in a more coordinated way to better support student success and student learning. So of the states that are participating in Core to College, we're not all the same. Several of the states are members of the PARC Consortium. Some are members of the Smarter Balanced Consortium. Some of the states that are participating in this project have very centralized education systems, and others, like Oregon, are much more local control kinds of states. And so for us, the decisions that we make must be made collaboratively. But regardless of those differences, all of the states that are working together are focused on developing a shared and consistent definition within our state, between our sectors, of what we intend to mean when we talk about college and career readiness. So we're all working on clarifying what that term is in our state. We're all focused on trying to develop an understanding of how post-secondary institutions can use multiple measures for placement. So in this case, can use the Common Core State Standards aligned assessment. For us, that would be the Smarter Balanced assessment, as a potential placement indicator. So those are conversations that we'll be having in the state of Oregon over the duration of this grant, which goes through the end of next year, 2014. So in addition to clarifying what we mean by college and career readiness, and focusing on ways that we might better align our assessments to reduce the barriers for students and reduce the unnecessary hurdles, that if students have demonstrated their proficiency in their knowledge and skills and what they're able to do, then might we provide them some kind of easier, more seamless pathway into post-secondary education that doesn't involve an additional placement test, particularly for those K-12 students going directly into post-secondary education. And the third piece of this project is really about that more fundamental issue that I think many of you are beginning to grapple with, which is, what does it mean? What does it look like when we begin to think about aligning our policies and practices to the Common Core? And one of the things that I'd like to mention is that of the groups that I have been meeting with, which include a variety of faculty and administrative groups throughout our state, I've also begun talking with, as Rachel mentioned, the deans of the colleges of teacher ed, and better understanding, I'm working with them to better understand what the challenges they are having in integrating the Common Core into their curriculum. So many of them are changing the sequence of their program, they're reconceiving their program, they're already asking students, prospective student teachers, to develop lesson plans that are aligned to the Common Core and work samples that are aligned to the Common Core. And one of the conversations that we're beginning to have is about this question of how can the colleges of teacher education better work with their K-12 districts and partners to inform each other, so that the K-12 districts are better informing the colleges of teacher ed how that might look to revitalize educator preparation in Oregon, and also what kinds of supports do the districts need that the colleges of teacher ed can participate in. And this conversation isn't just limited to the colleges of teacher ed. This is a question about how disciplinary faculty can work together for the purposes of improving student learning, student success by supporting their K-12 counterparts. So those are the questions that we're beginning to raise and that we're beginning to really take seriously in Oregon, and I feel very hopeful. I know there are a number of challenges, and we've already talked about a few of those today, a number of challenges, particularly in the area of resources. But this is really also an opportunity for us to be creative in thinking about how we might develop new models of working together. But the question of resources is also a key issue for our students. And many of you know, as Hilda mentioned, the emphasis on students' student loan rates and student loan defaults and the cost of post-secondary education for students, especially if we're thinking about providing more seamless transition for students, particularly if we're thinking about being clearer about the expectations. Can working in a more coordinated fashion, in better alignment, help to ameliorate some of those challenges of cost, because we're not adding an additional layer of placement testing. We may be not diverting students into developmental education that they may not need. It may be a question of the placement instrument and whether or not students have already demonstrated what they know and are able to do. And as we've looked at the Smarter Balanced Assessment, this is a much more rigorous curriculum through the Common Core that we're talking about. And so one of the key goals that I had for this meeting was to really be able to give all of you a little bit more information on the Common Core, as well as asking all of you for your input in this definition building process. And so I won't spend too much more time talking about the Core to College project itself, although I will say that we have a number of partnerships going on throughout the state. For example, Lane Community College is working with their math faculty, some of their math faculty are working with University of Oregon and local school district partners to explore issues of alignment in the math curriculum and content and mathematical practices of the Common Core. What does that mean? What does that look like? Tillamook Bay and Oregon State University, Tillamook Bay is also working with their local high school to better understand how to support students, particularly through career and technical education, how we might improve the level of mathematics that we ask students to use in a very context-based, practice-based approach. So those are some of the kinds of partnerships that are happening already. And if you or your institution is interested in those kinds of collaborative approaches and working with your partners, please let me know, because I would really like to support and hear about the work that you're already doing, and also support work that you have in mind that might better provide for more conversation between your local school districts and your institutions, whether your institutions are a community college or a university, or for those of you who are community members at this meeting, because I know we do have some of you who aren't within the post-secondary sector, how we can expand this process. So those questions are ongoing. But I will say that what's important about this project for Oregon really is that it gives us an opportunity to improve access to post-secondary education for students. It enables us to decrease the unnecessary barriers that students may find, and supporting their persistence and promoting their time to degree and certificate. And I know that many of you are focused on completion goals and how we can better meet those. And I think this is very much a part of that. And it's also a matter of recognizing that it's our responsibility in education both to meet students where they are, but also to help them learn from where they are. And part of what our responsibility is, as part of a larger P20 continuum, is to better understand where students are so that we can help them to learn and succeed and grow. And it involves a kind of reorientation for all of ourselves to think about the systemic changes that we need and how we can better support our teachers and our faculty, but also how we can better support students. Given the changing curriculum in K-12 school districts in Oregon with the Common Core, this is a huge opportunity for us to also look at how can we address that transition hurdle, but also how can we use the Common Core to inform our own teaching and our own expectations in the classroom if we're looking at K-12 level for students to be able to develop conceptual arguments and to have a deeper kind of understanding and to use evidence and to be able to effectively critique the reasoning of others, whether we're talking mathematical reasoning or whether we're talking critical reasoning. There's much more of an emphasis in this area that we might be able to really rally behind and think about how we can infuse those practices more deeply within our own curriculum, within our own institution, and think about the sequence of courses and how we prepare students and help students to be more successful and to let them know what the prerequisite knowledge and skills are for entering into post-secondary education, what they really need to be successful. So it's part of that larger issue of sending messages to students that are more consistent, that are less confusing, and really enable students to have less of that sense of culture shock when they get to a college campus. So these are some of the kinds of challenges that we're looking at, and particularly thinking from the student perspective, you know, one of the things that I think is challenging for all of us is that it's this time of immense change in Oregon, both in our education landscape and just in our larger context. And our students are facing that kind of ambiguity and that kind of change as well. How many of you are doing tasks in your job that you weren't necessarily trained for? Yeah, I mean, we're all learning all the time, and so making sure that students have learned how to learn is a key piece of this effort, and of our deeper goals of supporting our fellow citizens in Oregon. So I just wanted to say a little bit about that in terms of what it is that really we're focusing on to provide students the kinds of opportunities that might enable them to be more successful. So let's move on to our definition discussion. And I'll say a little bit about the draft definition that you have before you and how that came to be. I had, as I said in my email, I had sent out a lot of supporting material to task forces on campuses that had begun to be developed starting in the fall, but really getting underway in January. Institutions are beginning to develop college and career readiness task forces who are taking on this question of what does it mean to be college and career ready. And so for those institutions that formed a team and a lead person for their team, and if your institution hasn't done that yet, and you would like to get involved in that process, please let me know. But for those who stepped forward and said, yes, we have a team and we would really like to participate, I gave those teams, those task forces, a variety of documents which included David Conley's 4 keys of college and career readiness, and the Career Readiness Partnership Council definition of what it means to be career ready that Hilda referenced, and some information about Smarter Balanced, and some other kinds of pieces to better inform their thinking as they approach this question. I also gave them some other state backgrounds for, you know, what does it look like to develop a definition of college and career readiness? What does that look like in other states who have already done this before? Because I don't think that we're going to have anything significantly different. The expectations that we have are expectations that we all share, but it's a matter of articulating what those expectations are and how they how they express what we in Oregon want to convey, both to policymakers and to ourselves as we're thinking about our policies related to placement and related to student progression and student learning and what we count as success. But also sending that clearer message to students of really, this is what is expected of you to be able to have your full array of options at a post-secondary level. And I included, so as I received back those draft definitions, what I was really excited about was that even though I had given a variety of information pieces to the teams, all of the teams added their own additional information to inform their decision making as they were developing a draft definition, what they would put on the table as a draft definition of college and career readiness. So we had 3 very different pieces to be able to work from, but I think they all cohere in a really good way. And the compilation document that you have on your table is the representation of how I took those pieces and synthesized them together. And that's what I'm going to ask for all of your feedback on today as we move through this definition building process. And then based on the feedback that we receive, I'll work with the Core to College Steering Committee, which includes members of OUS, CCWD, ODE, as well as Dan Lang, Vice President of Instruction at Blue Mountain Community College. And I'll work with the steering committee and with those task forces to refine the definition based on the feedback that you all give today. So this is why your feedback is very crucial to this process. Any questions before we get started? So the question is about, given the multitude of soft skills that we have in our definition, in our draft definition right now, and the pieces that have been submitted, how would those be assessed? And I think that is a very crucial question. However, I would bracket that question of assessment just for a moment so that we can think about what it is that we intend more so than how exactly are we going to assess it. Because once we understand what it is that we want to know a little bit better, then we can have a better conversation about what that assessment might look like. Does that make sense?
It's not the first time in history where we committed to assessing the non-cognitive skills of youth.
Exactly. It's not as though we haven't been through this process before and we haven't looked at how we can assess non-cognitive skills. So we're not necessarily doing something brand new, but we're doing something with a little bit different of a spin and a little bit different of a context, particularly given the importance of degrees and certificates for students these days. So that's part of, again, why it matters so much, that they better understand what the expectations are.